Like Norman said in the last video, we're going to talk about my second child today. If you haven't watched that video, go back and watch it, like it, subscribe, and then watch this one. If you have watched that video, thank you. Share it with your friends. And I suggest you grab tissues for this one. About end of April, early May of 2019, I started feeling really sick. I started having nausea and vomiting after everything I ate. I was achy, I was sweaty, I was cold, I was running a fever, and I'm really notorious for getting pneumonia and bronchitis on months that you weren't sure you should get them, especially summer. So I let it go on for about a week, and then I took Connor to my grandmother and went on to patient first. They asked the normal questions, and they asked if there was a chance I could be pregnant. I said no, but they took their blood test and all their other samples and went about their way. A little while later, they come in and say, "Miss Lovelace, you're pregnant." And I looked at the doctor and went, no. Because, we had a almost 2-year-old at home. We barely had the space for that. So the doctor left and said he'd let me process, and I started crying. I called my mom, and she didn't answer first. I called my grandmother, and we were talking. She's like, "You gotta tell Chris." And I was like, "I don't want to." So I texted Chris finally and was like, "When you get a chance, call me. This is important." A couple minutes later, he texted me back and like, "You're pregnant again, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." So I was about 6 or 7 weeks pregnant then, and by the time I went to the doctor, I was 10 weeks pregnant. They sent me to go get the anatomy scan on August 28th. So for my birthday, I was going to know what I was having. The sonogram tech asked if we wanted a boy or a girl, and I said, as long as it's healthy, I really don't care, but I'd love a girl. It would be the first girl on either side for a pretty long time. 25 years on our side and 20-some years on their side, on Chris's side. So she says, "Well, I don't see any boy parts." So we told my grandmother, my sister, we told my mom. My mom cried. And then a week later, I got a call saying that there was a shadow around the baby's heart, that it could be fluid, that they were going to send me to Sinai Hospital to get another scan done. And they said, "Well, Miss Lovelace, we got good news and we got bad news. The good news is it's not fluid around your baby's heart. The bad news is that there's a hole in your baby's heart. And within the first year of her life, she's going to have surgery to fix it probably, although it could fix itself." We also got genetic testing done that day because cytology of Fallot, which is what the hole is called, and Down syndrome go hand in hand. At that point, the test was negative, and they said there was a very small chance that she would have Down syndrome or autism or anything like that. So then I got switched to University of Maryland Hospital because I became a high-risk pregnancy. I was getting scans every week, and they were monitoring her heart. During that time, I went and had imaging done with a pediatric cardiologist who said that he could do the surgery anywhere from 5 to 6 months to 4 months if it was possible, but there was a good chance that she was going to be in the NICU after she was born. So we toured the NICU, and they told me that there was a huge chance that I wasn't going to be able to hold my baby. That really hurt and was really scary because one of the best moments when you have a kid is being able to hold them. They decided that they were going to induce me. The original due date was January 9th, and they said they were going to induce me on the 2nd before that because it would be safer for the baby. And now that I had the high blood pressure, they were going to change it to December 23rd. On December 20th at 4:45 in the morning, I went to the bathroom, and it just didn't stop coming. And then went to go wake up Chris and told him that my water had broke, but to be calm, that he had to get Connor ready so after he dropped me off at the hospital, he could take him to my grandmother's house. And I went back in the bathroom, stood in the tub, and called Ma to let her know what was going on, called my doctor to let him know my water broke, and called my mom so she could get ready to come to the hospital. So my daughter Liliana was born at 1:41 in the morning on December 21st. And they put her on my chest at first. She wasn't breathing, so then after she breathed, they took her to clean up, and then while they were finishing up with me, they had her all packaged to go down to NICU and brought her over so I could hold her hand. I didn't get to go down and see her until close to 6 something in the morning because I had to finish my IV and they had to get me into my recovery room. When I got down there, she was on oxygen, and a few days later she stopped eating, so they had to put a feeding tube in her nose. Also, her first day in NICU, they said it looked like she was exhibiting features of Down syndrome. So they tested her and it came back positive. So now she has Down syndrome and she has a hole in her heart that's not getting any smaller. So she was on the feeding tube and oxygen until late January, and they started talking about putting a feeding tube into her stomach if she couldn't pass the swallow test. They were going to send us to Mount Washington, which is a pediatric hospital, and I asked them to hold off on the surgery and give her a few more weeks to try to feed on her own. They gave her a few more weeks, and she started feeding on her own. She passed the swallow test, and we were able to bring her home on Valentine's Day. On February 23rd, she was throwing up after everything she ate, and she felt really hot. So I took her temperature, and it was 100.4. Her oxygen levels were at 70, and her eyes were rolling into the back of her head. And they said that they asked if she was one of their cardiac patients, and I said yeah. And they took her in the back and started drawing blood and putting her on an IV, and they already had her on oxygen, and she was starting to peak back up, and turned out that she had the flu. So they admitted her. They took her up to PICU, and at that time it was close to 2 o'clock in the morning, so I stayed long enough for her to be comfortable and fall back asleep. And I went home and let Chris know what was going on. And then the next morning I took Connor back to my grandmother's house and went back out to the hospital. And she was doing fine. She just seemed tired, but she looked a lot better. They weren't feeding her yet because she was aspirating into her lungs, so they just had her on IV fluids. I stayed most of the day and went back home. The next morning it was February 25th, and I was getting ready to go see her, and they called and told me that they had to put her on a respirator. So I called my mom and asked her to come out to the hospital with me so I didn't have to walk in on it alone. And it turned out that she didn't need the respirator because she wasn't breathing, but they put her in a medically induced coma so that she could fight, and put on the respirator so she didn't have to breathe on herself, so it wouldn't put as much strain on her heart because it was too much for her. She stayed on the respirator for a little over a week, and they went ahead and scheduled her heart surgery. And they had found Her diaphragm had a hole in it and her liver was coming up through it, so they were going to fix that at the same time if they could. And they scheduled it for the 8th of April. So the Friday before, I was late getting there. When I walked in, I noticed that she was breathing heavy and like her head was bobbing. She felt really hot to me, not warm, hot. And I told the nurse, and she said, that she would tell the doctor. And she checked her temperature under her arm and said it was normal. And she still felt really hot to me, but I thought maybe it's because I came in from outside and I hadn't got used to the temperature. And at this time, she was finally feeding by herself. So I gave her a bottle, and she threw it right back up. And she still felt hot to me, and she was sleeping and was breathing 88 breaths a minute. For those of you who don't know, an infant at rest should only be at 60 to maybe high 50s at rest, and she was breathing 88. So I got the nurse again, and this time she decided to get a doctor, and the doctor agreed with me that she felt warm, so they took the temperature rectally, and it was 100.4. And they said that they were going to start her on Tylenol and put her back on oxygen, and they would let me know if something changed. About an hour after I got home, they called and said they moved her back to PICU, that she had pneumonia, and they had tested her for COVID. So I started freaking out because I've been around my son, my grandmother who's 82, and was just worried about everyone's health. The test came back negative, and her surgery got pushed back. And then they were talking about the surgery to put the tube in her stomach again, and I asked them, just give us time again. And so we went back to Mount Washington to give her time to feed and to wait out for the surgery, which ended up being May 11th. They kept her on the feeding tube up until the surgery. And I had to go in by myself. Chris couldn't come in. And the last thing I remember before the surgery was they gave her sedative so she wouldn't fight the anesthesia, and she fell asleep in my arms. And I had to hand her off to go on the surgery. So I waited. I was waiting in the waiting room by myself, and I was taking naps in between updates because I hadn't slept the night before because I was so scared. Everything went fine. There was no hiccups, and I went to go see her, and she looked just like a little doll asleep. And she started coming out of sedative, so they had everything ready to take her off the ventilator and put her on high flow oxygen. When she was coming out, she tried to roll over because she had started rolling over before the surgery, and it was causing her so much pain, and she was screaming, and there was nothing I could do. So they gave her medicine to help calm her down, some of the pain medicine, and she would be okay and then take a deep breath and cry again. We stayed at university for a week or so, and then they sent her back to Mount Washington to recover. They were talking about the tube in her stomach again and said they would do it on June 8th. Wow. And before that date, she started eating by bottle and was soon off the feeding tube, and then she was able to come home before June 19th. And we've been home ever since with no problems. And she has therapists and she has a million doctor's appointments, but looking at her, if you didn't know or you didn't see the scar, you would never know this poor girl went through all of that and had surgery at 5 months old. She is just such a happy baby. And she's eating like a pig. Doctors and therapists say she's doing so well. Even, early on, she didn't need the heart medicine that they thought she would need. They took her off the fluid medicine within the first week of being home. You know, all kids are miracles. All kids are blessings. But this one tested that. You know, she is my miracle baby. She's my little warrior princess. She's been through so much and is doing so great. And she won't even remember any of it. You know, there's certain things that I'll always remember. Seeing her blue. Seeing her on the respirator. Seeing her smile for the first time. And I went through postpartum really hard with her. Because there were so many days I couldn't hold her. And I still struggle with, was I being selfish when I went ahead and have her knowing everything she's gonna face? Well, you know, most of what she would face. But I wouldn't change it. I definitely learned with her that it's okay to ask for help. And it's okay to admit you're not okay. People kept telling me that I was so strong. And I said, I'm really not. I just come off that way because there's no other way to be, you know? I can't be upset. Connor would be upset. I can't be upset. Lily would know if I was upset. I had to be strong. Or look that way. I'm so blessed to be born in the family I was born in. My family were all supportive. My friends were supportive. You and Amy came down while she was still in NICU and visited, and you don't know how much that meant. And I had family that were living in like Virginia and North Carolina calling. My cousin Randy called up and prayed for her the night before her surgery. And I'm amazed. I hope this just lets people know that no matter how dark the situation is or how bad it seems, that there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. I wouldn't trade my kids for anything. And Lily is the most happiest kid I've ever seen. And she's doing great. And Connor's great with her. And I just appreciate being able to tell my story, and I hope it helps people.